The quest we've been on with Kohelet over the last few weeks is one in search of solidity amid the ephemerality, rootedness amid futility, a sense of stability amid the absurdity of life. We follow the teacher's exploratory journey into solidity in the antiquity and futurity of the earth itself, in her ability to stay rooted in chaotic times through deeply experiencing the small joys of life, in experiencing times and senses of solidity and stability amid the occurrence of both change and monotony, through the rapidity and banality of life. And I think for us, if we were to label as anything today as hobble, this word that is often translated in the text vanity, but can also mean futility or absurdity, it might be looking carefully and critically at the place humanity has created for ourselves on this planet. Hobble, absurdity. In our world of ecological crisis, climate collapse, environmental racism, rapidly diminishing ecospheres all over the planet, there should be something of Kohelet's sense of urgency in the search for a solid place to stand in the midst of chaos that you can palpably feel in your body right now. And like last week, when I invited you into an experimental posture in your relationship to time, this week I want to invite you into an experimental posture in your relationship to the earth. Something we've talked a good bit about over the last couple of years. I want to play with a framework that has emerged from me in studying this text in Ecclesiastes over the last week, some solid places for us to root our sense of grounding within the planetary web of life. And the focal passage in the book in this regard has come for me to be this one in chapter 3. For the fate of humans and the fate of animals is the same. As one dies, so dies the other. They all have the same breath, and humans have no advantage over the animals, for all is vanity. All go to one place, all are from the dust, and all turn to dust again. Kohelet isn't necessarily rejoicing here in the notion that humans and animals share the same fate. In a similar way, he names the futility of the wise and the fools, the just and the unjust, all meeting the same fate in death. But ever the realist, who is not afraid to name what she sees, even if it goes against the received wisdom of her tradition, the teacher observes something of critical importance in her search for wisdom and a solid place to stand amid the chaos. Humans and animals are bound together. I was captivated by this verse from Ecclesiastes this week in the way that the simplicity of the message challenges some strong, prevalent narratives that infiltrate our consciousness and our spiritualities today that often go unquestioned. Broadly speaking, I think we can categorize these narratives simply as supremacy narratives. They take many forms: white supremacy, patriarchy, nationalism, religious supremacy, heteronormativity, and on and on. But the one I want to confront today is perhaps the most subtle and least explicitly challenged, even by very justice-oriented communities like this one, and that is human supremacy, or human exceptionalism. I imagine it's easy to understand the gist of human supremacy. Humanity is situated at the apex of the pyramid of creaturely importance, at the top of the great chain of being. The needs and desires and well-being of all other planetary inhabitants are subordinated to the needs, desires, and well-being of humans, and some humans more than others, of course. Now, within this anthropological narrative of human supremacy is embedded an orientation toward the earth as a resource for human use and consumption. This orientation has been fueled by particular interpretations of scriptural texts. You could think about the subdue the earth and have dominion over the creatures passages that we get in most translations of Genesis 1:28. The eco-ethic, then, that emerges from the orientation is one adequately named, I think, ecological extractivism. Humans take what we want from the earth, as the earth is our dominion and a repository of resources that should belong to us. Now, I don't think I have to convince anyone here of the perils of the narrative of human supremacy, though I do think it's important to say that none of us, no matter how hard we are attempting to do so, can live our lives in the 21st century U.S. completely outside practices that are rooted in this narrative of human supremacy. Exceptionalism is deeply intertwined with every aspect of our lives, both national exceptionalism and human exceptionalism. And capitalism keeps profitable practices preferable. And capitalism attempts to hide us from the values that are bound up in those practices, hide from us the values that are bound up in those practices. Now, there's a second anthropological narrative that hinges on an image of humans as caretakers of the earth. Rather than rapacious resource-taking for human consumption and use, the human in this narrative is situated as a custodian of creation. This can lead to an ethic of appreciation and care for the earth that connects us to practices of less energy consumption, decreasing materialism, working for ecological justice, and a whole lot of things that are genuinely beneficial for the planet. And while this is a great improvement over the extractivist ethic of human supremacy, a caretaker narrative can still emerge from a paternalistic anthropology that positions humans over against the earth. And one in which the impetus for ecological care is appreciation and preservation for the benefit of future human generations. Something like, I want my kids or grandkids or future generations, etc., to inherit a livable planet, so I'm going to work to make that so. The notion that the planet would have its own needs and desires that don't fit into a logic of human livability and futurity rarely make it into these paternalistic narratives of caretaking. This is a relationship, this caretaker narrative is a relationship we can locate in scriptural texts as well. Texts like Psalm 8 that extol the beauty of creation, but still position humanity at the apex of that created order. But this isn't what Kohelet is pointing to in this passage from Ecclesiastes 3. Let me read that short passage again. For the fate of humans and the fate of animals is the same. As one dies, so dies the other. They all have the same breath, and humans have no advantage over the animals, for all is hevel, vanity, breath, ephemerality. All go to one place. All are from the dust, and all turn to dust again. I want to note a few important aspects of this text that we might miss in the English translation. When the teacher says that humans and animals all have the same breath, the word there is from the Hebrew word ruah, which variously means breath or wind or spirit. It's the same word we see in Genesis 1 when the ruah of God hovers over the face of the deep at the creation moment. Humans and animals share the same breath, akin to the breath of the divine at the event of originary creativity. And another connection to the Genesis creation narrative in this text is here in verse 20 of Ecclesiastes, where the teacher is reflecting on the fate shared by humans and animals alike in death, and says, all are from the dust, and all turn to dust again. The word dust here is again the word used in Genesis 2:7 when God forms humanity from the dust of the ground. Even more critical, I think, in this Genesis text for us here, the very words used to describe man, ha-Adam, where we get the proper name Adam for the first man, is tied inextricably to the earth itself. It is from the dust of the ground, ha-Adamah, that God forms the man, ha-Adam. We might literally think of Adam meaning something like earth creature, or dust creature, or mud creature, or earthling. Then in Genesis 2:9, the creation account continues with this description. Out of the ground, ha-Adamah, the same substance from which God formed man, ha-Adam, the Lord made every tree to grow that is pleasant to the sight and good for food. The very substance of the human is bound up in this account of primordial divine creation with the earth itself, in breath, in dust, in fate. So the teacher says, for the fate of humans and the fate of animals is the same. As one dies, so dies the other. They all have the same breath, ruah, the same divine wind that hovered over the chaos of the primeval waters. And humans have no advantage over the animals, for all is vanity, breath, ephemerality, fleeting. All go to one place. All are from the dust, and all to dust they return. What the verse is pointing to theologically is a message that subverts notions of human supremacy bound up in our theologies and practices by drawing upon death itself as the clearest window into how we are intimately related to every other living creature. Through our movement toward death, through our shared breath, through our emergence and return to the earth, humus, ha-Adam. We might hear in this text another valence of the teacher's realist appraisal of the human and the animal, that our fates are bound up with one another. Not simply that we share the same fate, and I think that is a really critical distinction. It's not only that we share the same fate with other living beings, but that our fates are bound up with one another. In this brief text, Kohelet is inviting movement beyond ecological caretaking modes to see the human as a relational participant in the larger web of life. An anthropological narrative that this suggests is one of earthly solidarity. The human as intricately entwined with the web of life. It summons an eco-ethic of ecological entanglement, embedding the human within the larger web of life, embracing our intimate relationality to that web. We might even see some other passages in Ecclesiastes speaking to relationships of solidarity that can, if we allow ourselves to read them from perspectives that aren't colored by human supremacy, these other passages can speak to solidarity between the human and the more than human. For example, what mutual relationships of earthy solidarity can we imagine emerging from this passage in chapter 4? Two are better than one because they have a good reward for their toil. For if they fall, one will lift up the other. But woe to the one who is alone and falls and does not have another to help. Again, if two lie together, they keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? And though one might prevail against another, two will withstand one. A threefold cord is not quickly broken. And key to Kohelet's portrayal of solidarity is the sense that the teacher has that this relational mutuality is forged through common precarity, ephemerality, even the fate of death and disaster. From chapter 9, listen to this verse. No one can anticipate the time of disaster. Like fish taken in a cruel net, like birds caught in a snare, so mortals are snared at the time of calamity when it suddenly falls upon them. Can we imagine relationships of earthy solidarity being forged through experiences of common precarity and ephemerality? Not just the inevitability of death for humans and animals alike, but death and disaster on a larger scale. Climate catastrophe, species extinction, ecosphere collapse. This eco-ethic of ecological entanglement goes beyond protecting the earth because of a deep sense of appreciation for it or preservation of the livability of future human generations. It pushes toward a perspective of relational mutuality in which the earth and its more than human inhabitants desire things from us, make ethical demands upon our lives that are not about livability of life for humans, or about our happiness, or about our future progeny, but are demands about the good that other creatures formed from the Had Adamah desire, who share a fate that is bound up with ours. When any species is headed for disaster, it is every species, including the human, that is bound up in that fate of destruction. When any regional biosphere is threatened by climate calamity, every creature is drawn into the breath and soil of that place, not because we care about it so deeply, but because we are inextricably entangled in its well-being for its own sake and not just for ours. When we look appreciatively at the earth and every creature and landscape within it that we long to save for our progeny, for our enjoyment, for our human livability, those creatures and those landscapes, the soil itself, look back at us with demands and desires of their own. So here Kohelet arrives. Humans are relational participants, bound in common connections of earthy solidarity within the larger web of life, which summon from us an ethical orientation of ecological entanglement. And for Kohelet, it doesn't really bring him any particular sense of joy to recognize this. It is not a teaching of wisdom centered in human supremacy. It is simply the truth of his observation of everything that takes place under the sun, and naming that reality for Kohelet is one solid step, one place of rootedness, one source of stability in an ongoing search for wisdom in living the days ahead.